Good morning or good evening. I would like to welcome you all to the presentation of the 2020 edition of the OECD Regions and Cities at a Glance. My name is Flavia Terribile, Chair of the OECD Regional Development Policy Committee, and I'm glad to know that we have more than 150 participants. Thank you very much for being here today, and I give the floor to Ms. Lamia Kamal-Shui, the Director of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. She will present the main high points of the OECD reports. Lamia, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Flavia. Good morning, everybody. I'm gonna make a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to start by sharing the screen, of course. So here we are. Does it work well?
Yes.
That's great. That's great. So I'm really delighted to be with you all today. For the launch of this very important biennial Regions and Cities at Glance publication. And I have to confess that this is one of my favorite deliverables from the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, because it's full of rich data, and I love the data. So as the world continues to battle with COVID-19, I feel it appropriate that this edition focuses on resilience. A great deal has been written about resilience, but too often the thinking has focused narrowly on individual sectors or markets, but never as a real integrated concept. But COVID-19 has reminded us that our economic lives are connected to outcomes in health, society, and the environment. And it shows that our system as a whole is only as strong as its weakest link. That is why this publication deliberately looks broadly at social resilience, economic resilience, at environmental resilience, and at financial resilience. For the first time, this report includes global coverage on metropolitan areas in the whole world. And alongside the main report, we are publishing country profiles for each member country. And we have also set up a new web platform to visualize all indicators for regions and cities in OECD countries and beyond. Actually, after this event, please do take your time to explore this. Today, I just want to provide you some highlights and some few key messages that emerge from this work. So given that we are living through a pandemic, it is fitting to begin this presentation with health. And we know that there have been huge differences between countries in the health outcomes from the pandemic. Our data show that there have also been huge differences within countries, and that not all places were equally prepared going into the health crisis. Let's consider first the death toll from COVID-19. Between February and June, OECD regions saw a 6% increase in deaths compared to the previous 2 years. That amounts to about 340,000 additional deaths. We saw particularly high growth in deaths in Chile, Colombia, France, Italy, Spain, and the US. And within countries, some regions have been very badly affected, with over 50% increase in deaths compared to the previous 2 years. That has meant, for instance, more than 25,000 excess deaths in Lombardy, more than 70,000 in New Jersey, and more than 15,000 in Madrid. Actually, there is a clear pattern here. You can see from the map that most of the red areas, that is those regions where the number of deaths increased the most, are large cities. And this included Milan, Madrid, New York, and so on. A number of factors explain these disparities. Urban density is one of them, but only, I would like to stretch the word only, when combined with lack of appropriate measures like contact tracing and poor housing conditions, that things get worse. We have seen some very dense cities like Singapore, Tokyo, and Seoul that managed to limit the spread of the virus with very proactive measures. And it may also be that many of these cities were just the first to be hit. On average, up until June, remote regions paid a lower price in human losses than other regions. But also over the past few months, we've seen the health impacts spreading toward less populated regions. And in the US, for instance, since July, the highest increase in the rate of deaths have been in remote areas. And of course, there are other important drivers too, including the availability of health infrastructure, background health of people, and the level of air pollution. I will turn to this next. So our data shows as well that many regions were poorly prepared. The map shows regional disparities in terms of access to hospital beds. And we can see that across the OECD, available hospital beds range from less than 2 beds to more than 7 beds per 1,000 inhabitants. On average, the best equipped regions in OECD countries have 3.5 times more beds per person than the least equipped ones. You can see that regions in red are those that are less equipped with hospital beds, and we can see there are many in the United States, the United Kingdom, Colombia, Chile, Turkey, and Mexico. The availability of hospital beds is a particular challenge for remote regions. Metropolitan region now have 65% more hospital beds per capita than remote regions, a gap that can really affect the capacity to cope with the COVID-19 crisis. Many articles recently pointed out to a possible correlation between pollution and morbidity linked with COVID. This is true. Air quality does matter, not just for everyday health, but also for COVID outcomes. The map here shows the levels of concentration of PM 2.5 in the air across cities. For this indicator, actually the report includes data for all cities in the world. And it shows that most cities have exposure levels above the recommended limit. The good news is that some progress is being made in cities in many OECD countries. They have been taking action, and we have seen exposure to particulate matter reduce since 1990. This is the case in Germany, the United Kingdom, in the United States. Many cities have experienced fastest improvement between 1990 and 2019, while the smallest improvements were in cities of Chile, Korea, and Japan. But clearly, this progress is not enough. In high-income countries, average PM2.5 levels remain higher than what WHO recommends, and at least 30 OECD countries have at least one city with air pollution above recommended levels. Cities in upper middle income countries such as China, Costa Rica, and Turkey, they have started to make progress only since 2010. And cities in low income countries have a concentration of PM 2.5 that are more than 4 times higher the levels recommended by the WHO, and these levels are continuing to rise. This is really problematic, and this includes cities in many countries, including in India and Morocco, for instance. So we also know that background health has also affected outcomes from COVID-19. People with high blood pressure, heart and lung disease, and obesity. But there are here again important differences across countries and within countries. For instance, Western European regions are more affected by respiratory diseases, while in the Americas, obesity is more widespread. And within countries, not all regions are equally affected. For example, the share of adult obese people can differ by more than 15 percentage points within Mexico, Chile, USA, Canada, and United Kingdom. And as you can see in the chart to the right, in some regions in Mexico, Chile, and the United States, close to 40% or more of the population is obese, posing a higher risk in terms of fatal diseases. In Mississippi, a person is 23% more likely to suffer severe symptoms if infected with COVID-19 than in Colorado due to obesity. So we talk about health. The economic impact of the crisis have, of course, also been extremely severe, and our regions and cities are not equally resilient. Many were already struggling going into the crisis. We have to remind that even in 2018, half of OECD regions had still not recovered to a 2008 unemployment level. We are talking a lot about the fact that the crisis is deepening existing disparities, including between regions within countries. We have to remember that across the OECD, regional economic disparities have been rising since the global financial crisis, and that increase has been particularly high in France, Poland, Italy, and the United States. There is a clear pattern within countries where we see that actually metropolitan regions have grown faster than remote regions, with the gap between the two types of region increasing by 3 percentage points. So the initial spatial impact of the crisis has depended on several factors, including regions, trade links, and industrial mix. We have been mapping the share of jobs potentially at risk from restriction across region, and we found that it can vary from 15% to 35% across the OECD. That works show that regions specialized in tourism or exposed to trade were particularly hit. Large cities are also more at risk than other regions because they concentrate many services. However, large cities have in other way been more resilient. And this is because the ability to shift to remote working. The fact is that cities have many more jobs that are amenable to remote working than in other places, actually 13% more than rural areas. And among cities, capital regions are in the best position. Île-de-France, London, Stockholm, Brussels, Prague have more than half of jobs that are amenable to remote working. And conversely, places like Mississippi in the US and the Northeast in the UK are in a much weaker position in terms of their ability to switch to remote working. So the switch to teleworking has been supported, of course, by better digital infrastructure and skills in our city than in remote areas. Without the right infrastructure and skills, rural areas risk slipping further behind. They also risk missing out on new opportunities that may otherwise arise from the shortening of supply chain in reshoring of economic activities. We have been talking about that a lot recently. The chart here shows the proportion of households with access to high-speed internet in 2019 in rural areas compared to the national average. 1 in 3 households in rural areas still does not have access to high-speed broadband. And digital take-up is also very uneven across regions. In some regions in Italy, Japan, Greece, Portugal, and Turkey, a quarter or more of households do not use internet. So these differences in the extent to which occupation can be shifted to remote working and in the quality of the digital infrastructure and skills could further exacerbate regional inequalities. And the slide here shows the case of Italy. We can clearly see that the richer regions have much more great potential to sustain activity through remote working during the pandemic than poorer areas. the share of jobs amenable to remote working in Italian regions range actually from more than 35% in Lazio and Lombardy to less than 25% in Basilicata. So COVID-19 has exacerbated growing regional disparities and brought new challenges for our cities and region, and definitely this is a great matter of concern. But we have also to remember that already pre-COVID, they were facing major pressures from elsewhere on the environment, urban infrastructure, automation, and technological changes, and also from population aging, among others. At the OECD, we call that, the challenge raised by the megatrends. And we even had recently a ministerial meeting about the megatrends. But now we have, in addition to that, we have COVID. Talking about the megatrend, the climate change is of course no more a challenge for the future. It is a challenge for now. Average temperatures have increased in many metropolitan areas around the world during the last 50 years. Since 1970, cooling needs, what experts call cooling degree days, a measure for how long and by how much outside air temperature was above 22 degrees. Actually, these cooling needs have increased by almost 25 years in OECD cities since 1970. And in Europe, southern regions experience higher increases in cooling need. They have more than double in Athens, for instance, in Greece, and in Taranto, in Italy, since 1970. Adapting our energy production is also a huge challenge for all regions, but particularly for metropolitan region, which depends much more on carbon intensity energy production. The chart here shows that only 13% of the energy produced in the largest cities comes from renewable sources, while accounting for only 70% of population. Regions far from metropolitan areas produce 44% of electricity using renewable sources, and they generate 48% of the clean electricity in OECD countries. For example, while 5 out of 7 Portuguese regions are coal-free in electricity production, Central Portugal and Alentejo, among the largest electricity producer, still rely on coal. Another interesting data relates to deforestation. I was really amazed that we were able to have this very interesting data. Deforestation, as we know, is having a huge impact both on our climate and on our biodiversity. And our report shows tree cover has declined in more than half of cities between 1992 and 2018, with the most severe impact in North America and Australia, where you can see many areas in the map here highlighted in red. We have also regions and cities like Bergen in Norway, Boston in United States, and Oviedo in Spain that lost more than 15% of tree cover since 1992. Places also need to respond to demographic changes, and in almost all countries, we have seen a consistent increase in concentration of the population. In metropolitan regions, the red dots on the chart here, since 2000, the share of population in OECD metropolitan regions has increased by almost 2 percentage points on average. This is definitively putting additional pressure on our urban infrastructure. But it's also creating real challenges in declining low-density areas. These left behind places face not just depopulation, but also an acute aging crisis. It is their young that who are moving to cities. Mobility of young people represent on average more than half of within-country moves. This has meant the dependency ratio has increased rapidly in remote areas. And of course, this put huge pressure on social services and healthcare, as well as on local public finances. There are, of course, fewer working age taxpayers. So our OECD subnational government finance database show that subnational governments have, of course, a key role to play in rising to these challenges. The chart here shows that they account for 41% of all public spending. This is an average, for the whole OECD. And the whole key levers over infrastructure, skills, health, and education. What is interesting in our publication today is that for the first time, it also showed the critical role of municipalities within this. As in the past, we used to aggregate data for regions and cities all together under the category of subnational government. And now we have more disaggregated data. So we can see even, the contribution of municipality within this. And we show they account for nearly 19% of total public spending in OECD countries for which we have comparable data. But we also know that COVID-19 has placed huge pressure on these finances, both in terms of increased expenditures and a strong decline in tax revenues and other revenues due to more limited use of some local public services, like public transport, for instance. And actually, we have, in our recent work, we have seen that all subnational governments are fiscally impacted by the crisis, but our data show that large cities, more than those cities that are more than 500,000 inhabitants, they expect to be hit the hardest. So as we look to the future, we need to, of course, to build resilience across all these domains. Most clearly, the crisis has shown just how important our health infrastructure is, and we need to invest more on these places, and national governments need to do that. But it has also highlighted the risk of high levels of pollution and healthy lifestyle, something that we knew, but they have been exacerbated by the crisis. Second, the digital transition is here to stay. We need to accelerate our investment in digital infrastructure and skills to match. Third, regions and cities need to take bold action on climate change to transition workers away from carbon-intensive industry, invest in green infrastructure to create jobs during the recovery. Fourth, it could also alter urbanization patterns. Widespread telework may remain a permanent feature of the future, changing where people live and work. So it would be important, and many are already doing that, to adapt regional and urban planning to this new reality. And last but not least, aging will continue everywhere, putting particular pressure on a remote, where aging combined with the population, actually. So this publication is accompanied by customized brochures and country profile for each member countries, showing key facts related to regional and urban development. And you can find those country profile in the website of the publication. In addition, we launched the new Atlas, a web platform to visualize all indicators for regions and cities in OECD countries and beyond. I really invite you to play with it. It's really fun, and you can find the URL in the slide, in the last slide of my presentation, which is this one. So to my last words, of course, go to the team, to Rüdiger, to Paulo, and all the others working on statistics and data. This is really an amazing publication, and I rely on all of you to disseminate this data, because this is a rich set of data that I'm sure could be very useful for many of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lamia. As was underlined by the director of CFE, we are still in the middle of a crisis of historic proportions. Uncertainty on the economic and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and on the timing and intensity of the recovery is still very high. But one thing is certain, the impact of this crisis differs greatly across regions, cities, and rural areas, with some places being more affected than others. Moreover, the capacities to address the negative consequences of this crisis differ across regions due to their territorial organization, institutional system, and fiscal position. If left unaddressed, such differences might reinforce pre-existing territorial disparities and in turn undermine the political stability and cohesion of our societies. But as was shown by this report, the crisis has also been a catalyst for change in many areas, such as, for example, the use of digital technologies. So we need to use this moment to better anticipate changes and support the green and digital transitions. We also need to use this moment to promote a new stakeholder approach and disrupt existing structures of exclusion and inequality. It is very important for policymaking to become innovative, inclusive, radical, transformative. This is a word of Enrico Giovannini. And this will require continued efforts to improve policy evaluation tools and the production of subnational statistics and indicators, their granularity, the timeliness of data, and comparability. So on behalf of the Regional Development Policy Committee, I would like to thank and congratulate the Secretariat, the team of CFE, and in particular Rudiger and Paolo Veneri, head of the Territorial Analysis and Statistical Unit. In the last years, the OECD has expanded the breadth and the depth of data and indicators available at territorial level in many domains, including SDGs, well-being, business environment, openness to trade, environmental resilience, migration, expenditure and investment by regional municipal governments. Also new metrics and territorial classification have been developed to improve the international comparability of subnational data, increasing their relevance in a rapidly changing world. So I'm really honored today to share my thoughts, my views with 5 well-known experts, policymakers, colleagues, but also friends. We have with us Professor Enrico Giovannini, Professor Philip McCann, Professor Evelyn Van Leeuwen, Alessandro Alasia, the chair of the Territorial Working Party on Territorial Indicators, and Ms. Theodora Brandmüller. So, Professor Enrico Giovannini, welcome back to the OECD. As you know, Enrico Giovannini was chief statistician of the OECD in 2001 and 2009, president of the Italian Statistical Institute in 2009-2013, Minister of Labor and Social Policies in 2013-2014, is a professor at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and maybe more importantly, the founder and the director of the Alliance, of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, a coalition of more than 207 civil society organizations established 5 years ago to implement the Italian Agenda for Sustainable Development. Enrico, this OECD report shows that regions and cities can perform very differently in many domains, not least on advancing towards the SDGs. So given your broad experience, also at the political level, how important it is to monitor SDGs at the subnational scale, and why?
Thank you very much, Flavia, and good afternoon to everybody. First of all, let me really warmly congratulate the OECD for this incredible achievement. I still remember when the first report, OECD Territorial and Cities at a glance report was designed and implemented when I was at the OECD. So I'm biased, okay? Everybody should know that. But I think that in this report, you have made incredible jump towards not only a very, very useful tool, but also to provide an overview of what's going on now, not just in the past. And this is the first point I would like to make. Thanks to the work of the OECD and also, of course, your work as chair of the territorial policy committee, the OECD is providing a lot of updated figures, and this changed the perception of policymakers and media of the importance about territories. By the way, the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development will publish its territorial report in 2 weeks, and we will promote, of course, this important publication as well. Italy and some Italian cities, such as Milan, for example, had discovered how fragile and vulnerable they were to these, due to this pandemic outbreak. And of course, are rethinking about their future. I was part of the exercise about Milano 2046 that was just concluded, where we tried to engage, as you said, Flavia, civil society organizations, experts, to think about the future. And the data provided today show clearly that cities have a lot of pluses, but also some challenges ahead because of climate change, because of technological transformation and ecological transformation. And we know from anecdotes at this point that some people, at least in Italy, are deciding to move out of the cities to benefit from, for example, online connections in light of a future expansion of smart working. And this could really change the functioning of our urban areas, but posing incredible challenges to planners, because the dichotomy between inner areas and urban areas will become a little bit more blurred, with a lot of new services that will be requested. One important element of this publication is that it covers several domains of what we could say quality of life, and sustainable development is just the projection toward the future of quality of life. And this concept that we at the OECD promoted so much, stimulating a world movement to go also beyond GDP as a yardstick for measuring our performances, is now, I think, reinforced very strongly by these crises. People are rediscovering that, like myself, that spending 2 hours per day in traffic jams is not the best way to spend our life. And I regret when I was living in Paris without a car and able to go by walking to the OECD or by metro. And this will have an incredible impact on consumption patterns and also on technological development. Let's think about the new forms of mobility. 2 points I would like to make, and then I stop. 2 words that have been used in Lamia's presentation. The first one is vulnerability. The other one is resilience and transformative resilience, as we have developed, conceptually speaking, working at the European Joint Research Center. The recent report by the European Commission is pushing the idea of strategic foresight and anticipation for building more resilient and less vulnerable societies. But resilience has been interpreted for years, also by the OECD and at the OECD, as the capacity of jumping back after a crisis. And so the recommendations from experts to policymakers was follow the policies of the most resilient countries. They are the models to follow. Now, you want to jump back only if you were in an optimal position. If you were not in an optimal position, you need to jump forward, to bounce forward, not back. This means that the normal way of assessing resilience must be changed. And this requires analytical work. And of course, the measurement of vulnerability is also important. This is why I'm just advocating what we did at the European Commission. You can find on the Commission website, first dashboards of indicators of vulnerability and resilience that could be eventually used by the OECD to enrich the next year publication in this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. The indicators, over 100 indicators presented in this edition of the OECD Regions and Cities at a Glance, provide a comprehensive assessment of the factors that can contribute to a faster recovery and higher resilience. It provides a unique comparative picture that can help governments navigate the challenges and also address local public investment needs in this context of extreme uncertainty. So Philip McCann. Philip McCann, very good friend, is professor of urban and regional economics in the University of Sheffield Management School, honorary professor of economic geography in the Faculty of Spatial Science at the University of Groningen, the Netherlands. Philip McCann is one of the world's most highly cited and widely published spatial economists and economic geographers. So Phil, what is in your view the most important contribution of the report, and how does it contribute to the debate on the current and future relevance of regional disparities and territorial inequalities?
Thank you, Flavia, and thank you to the authors of the report. I was privileged enough to read earlier drafts of the report and to provide feedback. I have to say that the Regions and Cities at a Glance, the OECD document, is just about my favorite publication out there in the field. I've got a whole library of my own covered in post-it notes and comments going back for more than a dozen years in real detail. For me, they are the most authoritative documents. They're a crucial resource for all of us in the field. So it's just an enormous thank you for those of us out there working in the field, to the team who build this. If I step back pre-COVID, one of the issues that comes out so strongly from the report, and there were always elements in previous reports of this, but is the scale of divergence, which is appearing in so many arenas across OECD countries. If we go back to the pre-global financial crisis period, we were broadly in a world of convergence interregionally in so many countries. There were so many papers written about convergence clubs and all of these kinds of topics. Whereas the last decade has been a very, very different story. There are still countries out there which are experiencing either interregional convergence, catch-up processes, or a fairly flat relationships. But what, of course, is of real concern is more and more countries now are experiencing divergence internally. And in some cases, those divergences are also accelerating between core regions and peripheral regions, between urban areas, rural areas, between small towns, big cities. And they're not the same pattern in each country. They're different patterns in each country, which requires careful thinking country by country to try and understand which countries are experiencing which phenomena. But the point is that we are clearly moving from a world of convergence to divergence over the last decade. So that means that parts of our countries are already in a relatively vulnerable position. And now, of course, we've got this gigantic shock, which even in comparison to the global financial crisis, is something which is on a scale which is really hard to comprehend even now, as we start looking at the forward statistics regarding unemployment rates, potential fiscal shocks, insolvency rates, and so on. I mean, these are really really alarming. So the inequalities which have been emerging in various countries, it seems to me, is the central challenge, is we're not starting from a level playing field. We're starting from a field which is diverging, a playing field which is diverging in so many countries. So regions are coming into the current crisis on very different trajectories already. So the concern that I think many of us have is that the crisis potentially, there are so many mechanisms via which the crisis can exacerbate these inequalities. There are some issues around changes in technology, substitution, face-to-face for home working, some relocation patterns, some shift to more climate change friendly modes of transportation, for example. But there are also enormous mechanisms which the crisis is likely to set in store and kind of set in motion, which are likely to move in the opposite direction. So what does that imply? I'm a kind of a pessimistic optimist or an optimistic pessimist on these issues. Do I think this is a chance for a great reset and everything's going to move well in terms of inclusivity and sustainability? I think the answer is capital letters, no and no. On the other hand, that is really a call to arms, that we have to take these policy and institutional challenges to a different level now. So if I think of the OECD growth strategy, which I think has been a very, very good framework to think about the world in terms of stronger, cleaner and fairer, one of the weaknesses of that, and it's not a critique of the OECD, you could say the same thing for smart, sustainable, inclusive, for the European Commission, for example, is that many countries and localities have treated stronger, cleaner and fairer as a kind of a menu. We'll do the smarter stuff and probably somebody else can do the cleaner stuff or the fairer stuff. This has been widespread, that kind of menu type of thinking. Where are we going to make the quick wins that look better? Well, we want to be more sciencey, more R&D. And those which have done the sustainable, for example, have tended to be more prosperous places anyway, because they, prosperous cities can do joint ventures with big tech companies to institute new transportation systems, smart metering, things like this. It's much more difficult for weaker places to do this. And in addition, a lot of big corporate multinationals in these new digital worlds don't want to work with weak places. They don't want to be seen, or at least in the last decade, in too many arrangements with weaker places. They want to be with the fashionable cities, the capital cities, the high income, the knowledge intensive places. And this has been a problem, this kind of menu setting and menu choosing philosophy, which has been out there. I think what this document says is those kind of ways of thinking are no longer viable. If we want to make progress towards the climate change mitigation agenda, and we've probably lost between 3 and 5 years off the Paris agreements simply because of coronavirus, because of the need just to get economies working again and jobs back in place. We've lost time. Inclusion is under even greater stresses than ever. So it would seem to me to have a really holistic approach that really is about smarter, sustainable, smarter, cleaner, stronger, fairer, stronger, inclusive, all of those things tied in intrinsically. That requires a lot more thinking. This document helps us to start to think about how to do it because it provides the evidence. And I think here, the whole emphasis on governance that the CFE program has been so core on for the last decade or more. What about the governance and the policy issues? I think it's time for all of us to step up. And I think that this document really is a wake-up call for that moment. Thank you,
Phil. The cutoff date for data, including this publication, was August 2020, but due to the time lag of subnational statistics, the last available year is generally 2019 for labor market and demographic data, 2018 for finance data, and 2017 for entrepreneurship, innovation statistics, social statistics on metropolitan areas. So it will be very interesting in 2 years' time to compare the different map of these reports. So coming back, Miss Professor Evelyn van Leeuwen. Professor Evelyn is chair of the urban economics at Wageningen University, vice president of the European Regional Science Association, and also scientific director of Amsterdam Institute for Advanced Metropolitan Solution. So Evelyn, the OECD report provides comparative evidence on several aspects of regional and urban societies that have been or might be affected by the crisis. So as Vice President of the European Association of Regional Science, what in your views are the most important contributions that the regional scientific community could provide to understand the role of cities and regions in the post-COVID world?
Yeah, Flavia, thank you very much for also inviting me and for being part of this discussion. And I also would like to congratulate you with a very interesting and relevant report. And what I particularly like about the report is the wide range of indicators that are highlighted, but also in looking inside regions and not only, of course, comparing countries, but looking at different types of regions in terms of urbanity, but also in terms of accessibility, and highlighting that not all cities are the same, but also not all rural areas are the same. And by that, putting more diversity, I think, in how we think about regions. Because what I often encounter is that people either focus on urban or rural areas without making distinctions between large and small cities, between more and less accessible rural regions. And we see there is such a great diversity between these type of regions in terms of how they deal with the economic development, but also in terms of how they are hit by the COVID-19 crisis. So I think that gives a very good insights also for regional scientists to do their research and not have to deal with these connotations that we often have of urban areas that are very successful and rural areas that are lagging behind, but there's so much more to tell about these different types of regions. And so what I think that the regional scientist can really play an important role is also what Lamia explained in her presentation, is that we see both the contextual and the compositional effects of the corona crisis or the COVID-19 crisis, and also all kinds of economic development. So what I mean is that it's about the composition of the economy, it's about the composition of the people living in certain areas that make how they are hit by either in terms of health, but also in terms of economic developments. It's also about the context. So it's about the physical context of certain cities that are better able to deal with public space, for example, that have higher quality institutions that are in a region that is well connected or that's growing anyway. So both this compositional and this contextual insights, I think, are very relevant to understand the current crisis and also how we can come better or build back better after the crisis. So I think so that's very important, this interplay between context and composition, also insights in different kind of mechanisms in terms of the environment, in environmental impacts, in terms of the economy, in terms of social developments and inequality, and also the importance of institutions. And if we also take a spatial look at it through a spatial lens, then I think understanding how regions influence each other, so spatial interactions are very important. So if we invest in a certain area, how does that impact other regions? I really also like the graphs about the energy transition, or about the production of energy in different types of regions, and also the energy use. And if we could have that also on a time base, perhaps over seasons, but also by day, of course, I think we can have better insights in the interactions between more urban, more rural regions. And I think that if we can have better interactions between urban and rural regions, we could also have a more resilient, regions at different spatial levels. So better understanding processes in space and time, I think, is very important. And finally, also to better perhaps facilitate the redistribution of cost and benefits. Because if we really want to have a more sustainable society, a more equal society, It's about understanding where costs end up and where benefits end up, and how we might need to redistribute it to really, to have a more fairer and an equal world that I think also will be more sustainable.
Thank you, Evelyn. I would like also to emphasize that for this report, new metrics, not for this report, but in these years, new metrics and territorial classification have been developed by CFE to improve the international comparability of subnational data, increasing also their relevance for policy making. So Alessandro Alasia, the chair of the Working Party on Territorial Indicators, Assistant Director of Statistics Canada. Alessandro, with the COVID-19 crisis, national statistical offices have been facing growing pressure to provide timely statistics. Real-time data is all what we are looking for in policy making. So what is Statistics Canada doing in this respect, notably for statistics at territorial level, and what are the domains where most progress is needed now?
Thank you, Flavia. I also would like to start by thanking the Secretariat for organizing this event and congratulating all the team at the Secretariat for this remarkable publication. Back to your question, what is Statistics Canada doing? It's not easy to summarize because National Statistical Office have been under a lot of pressure to produce more data, and there has been a wealth of initiative and activities. So I will not be able to cover it all, but I will focus on some key example. If I can maybe summarize it all in one sentence, I would say that COVID has been a phenomenal accelerator of some of the modernization trend and effort that were already underway in many statistical offices. Not only Statistics Canada, we did start a modernization plan a couple of years ago, and COVID has really accelerated some of these changes. So to be a little bit more specific, I think the activity can be summarized in three main areas. Real-time statistics. The second one would be new data sources and new methodology. And the third one is really an emphasis on granular statistics. Again, these three dimensions very often go together. They don't need to go separately. In fact, we have real time with new data and with an emphasis on more granular data. To give you some example of what we have done, and I think this is very much in line with the activities of many other national statistical office. Again, the first focus of attention has been on more timely data, more timely data. I would even say real-time data to the extent possible. Again, we were used to think about timely data or when we're talking about annual or monthly statistics with a time lag of 2-3 months between reference period and publication of results. Now, the real time, we're really focusing on something that has a time lag of a week or maximum a month between the reference period and the time of publication. To do so, we launch a number of nowcasting or flash estimate. An example, the most evident one has been our nowcasting estimate of GDP. Now you can imagine in April 2020, who was interested in the GDP estimate of February 2020? Pretty much nobody. Of course, that is a very relevant statistic, but in the context of post-COVID, when everybody knew that there was a major shock in the economy, nobody was really interested in having the GDP estimate with a 2-month lag of a period before COVID. Everybody was focusing on what was happening after COVID. So Stats Canada launched a flash estimate of GDP. That is a macroeconomic statistic, of course, but just to give you the relevance, the sense of what has been done. That estimate was done with partial data, partial information, and some modeling, some estimation. So the key point here is that there was a compromise between the quality and the accuracy of the data and timeliness. And I'll get back to this point because it's very important from a statistical point of view. The second area of work has been new data and new method. Again, let me give you an example here what we have done. In recent months, we start to explore the possibility of a real-time business condition index. And for this index, we start to use a number of private sector API reporting the condition of businesses. Particularly in terms of business operation versus business closure or temporary closure or permanent closure. And, you know, I'm not going to name names. You can imagine, you know, who are the main players in this area, but there are a number of API that provides this type of information. So we've been combining some of these real-time data because you can extract that information weekly. We've been combining this information with Stats Canada estimates, as well as with alternative other data source. We are looking at mobile device information and possibly also some web scraping. So this is in development. But the idea is to have really a near real-time indicator of the business condition. And this can be generated with a very local dimension, because of course we know that lockdowns now tend to be localized or regionalized. So we need to have that information by major metropolitan area, by major area. It wouldn't make sense to have a national statistics on that. So really, again, the focus on real time and then the third direction of work has been more granular data. Again, that was in our modernization plan before COVID, but with COVID, of course, that has become a must-do, a necessity. Again, the impact of COVID-19 is very local, and it's very well documented at this point. So what have we done? Again, a number of activities. I'll make just a couple of examples of activities that have been undertaken. First of all, we enhance our investment in geomatics project with a coordination activities across between fields. I am in the economic statistics field at Statistics Canada. So within our field, we start a coordination for all the geomatics projects, and that was also then coordinated at the corporate level. And then we started to do some investment, reinvesting in rural statistics. Again, that was an area with some weaknesses, data gaps. It's quite well understood. So we start to reinvest that and then generate some statistic with a rural focus. For instance, we are now developing an index of accessibility to broadband and internet services. Again, this is a new indices.
Thank you, Alessandro. Very, very useful. We have a second round, so you can complement the
perfect
information.
I stopped here, and that was all the example I had to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandro. Theodora Brandmüller, she's leading the team on regional statistics and city indicators in Eurostat. She has been the co-editor of the Eurostat Regional Yearbook, a real passion for storytelling with numbers. Theodora, the pandemic has led to an increased demand for more granular data. This was a point by Alessandro, to support statistical analysis, but also policy making across European countries. what in your view should be the priority for Eurostat and for national statistical offices to address effectively such increasing demand in terms of topics, of data sources, of geographies covered? Thank you, Teodora.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for the possibility to contribute to this panel discussion. I feel honored. And let me also join the others in congratulating the OECD on the recent report, first of all. As a co-editor of a similar publication by Eurostat for almost 10 years, I think, estimate vaguely the incredible amount of work which is behind this publication. And to have a timeliness, which you mentioned, Flavia, August 2020 as a cutoff date, and then publish is just really amazing, so to say. So congratulations. And I think it's so important to communicate the data we have, because I believe that no matter how much information we produce as official statisticians, it is just as useful as much as it's communicated, especially in this current post-trust world. We have, that's the best opportunity to fight disinformation, and it's our responsibility to make sure that the information, also what the OECD has been producing, it reaches its audience. So in that context, I really welcome also the online display of the analysis, so the atlas and the different visuals, so not only the report itself. And coming back to your question, so about the priorities in terms of topics and in terms of geographies to look at how to address this. So the current crisis, which started as a health crisis, then translated quickly into an economic crisis when the containment measures were imposed. But now if I look at the news, I can see actually the social distress it causes. So we really have to address it in a very holistic way. So also in that sense, I think the report was very appropriate. And so what changes it required from Eurostat? Of course, we also had to reprioritize our work. Let me give you an example. So in April, Eurostat launched the data collection on weekly deaths at a detailed regional level, broken down by age groups. So this was a one-off, or a first off, so to say, of such data collection. And the data is now published and updated on a weekly basis. And it allows us to calculate indicators, which was also portrayed in the presentation by Lamia, the excess mortality, which was a very important indicator of the COVID crisis response as the first line of response, so to say. Another example, what we have as similarly to what Alessandro explained, it accelerated the work we have been already doing on collecting data, geospatial data on the availability of healthcare facilities. Now, the geospatial data, it means that we will be able to calculate very granular accessibility indicators for healthcare. And this is also something we have been planning to do. It was on our, let's say, plans, but this really accelerated the work. And maybe one last thought on the geographies we would like to use in the future, especially when it comes to resilience. So the work that Mr. Enrico Giovannini mentioned, the dashboard. So for a resilience dashboard prepared by the Joint Research Center, our main comment was when we saw it, please include as much as possible data by degree of urbanization, so that we can look at rural areas, towns and suburbs and cities, because there is a big difference. We can already see it in the current situation, but also we will see, and I hope that now the focus will be on recovery. And then we can see, for example, how the digital skills, which show a huge difference in terms of urban rural patterns, or tertiary education, or participation in educational activities, it will all have an impact, and will enable us and enable policymakers to better formulate policies. And maybe I stop here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Teodora. We have a second round of questions. I ask 3 minutes to each participant. So, Professor Giovannini, do you think the COVID-19 crisis has changed the way countries are moving, are bouncing forward, as you said, towards sustainable development? And what do you think should be the priorities from the policy side?
Well, there isn't a rule about that because it depends on how countries have decided to react. For example, US was not indeed a champion of reacting according to the principles of sustainable development. Europe has demonstrated an incredible leadership to react in a new way, not just copying what was done previously. Again, at the world level, there are countries like New Zealand, which is led, by the way, by a woman who has been now confirmed as prime minister with more than 50% of votes, who indeed embraced the idea of equitable and sustainable well-being as a reference of national policies. So it depends. The good news is that the world of finance has reacted, decided to go even more than before towards responsible and sustainable investment. All the data show that the main investment funds have decided to strengthen the use of ESG criteria to finance companies and to allocate investments according to sustainability principles. And even again in Europe, the European Investment Bank has reinforced its policies towards sustainability. So it depends. There isn't, I would say, a clear trend, but it depends on political leadership. Now, let me add 2 points here, which are extremely important at local level. At local level, the situation is still not known because statistics, as you said, at the local level arrive later, but there isn't an easy monitoring of what cities, regions are thinking about their future. And this is something that the OECD could invest in, given your incredible network. We see at Italian level a lot of interests for these topics, also because of the pressure that we put on regions and urban areas towards the development of agendas, regional and city agendas for sustainable development, and also thanks to the effort made by the Italian government over the last 2 years. But we also see a lot of confusion at this point, because under words sustainable development, even the most old-fashioned policies could be sold, like companies are selling almost all type cars, just saying that they are electric, while they have a very little capacity of electricity-based engines. On the other hand, and then I close, life for a lot of people is getting worse and worse. And therefore, the risk that policies towards transition, ecological transition, can be less easily accepted by people, especially in those places where the crisis hits stronger, more largely. So the game is not over at all. And as Philip McCann said before, there are so many uncertainties ahead of us. There are so many resistances and so many fears that policies and political leaders, and I would say also economic leaders, need to be very convincing to move their communities to go in this direction. We know, from an analytical point of view that this is the only way to go, but this doesn't mean that necessarily people will be ready to go in this direction.
Thank you very much, Enrico. I would like only an information. At the OECD, we have a project also on localizing SDGs and a web tool that you can find on the web, on the OECD web, to monitor the distance to the end values of the 17 UN SDGs for regions and cities in OECD and partner countries. So it's a very interesting and useful tool. Philip McCann, the OECD report shows that in the whole OECD area, regional disparities in GDP per capita have increased in half of OECD countries since 2008, in half of OECD countries. And this increase has been particularly high in France, Italy, Poland, and the United States, also UK a little bit. Will the current shock have similar effects in your views, exacerbating strong pre-existing territorial disparities? This is also a question in the chat that was highlighted by the participants.
Yes, Mark. The way I try to think about these things is by breaking it down into categories of mechanisms or potential mechanisms. So one of them that we've been talking about already, the kind of substitution of technology for being able to work online, the kind of things that we're doing now instead of commuting, transportation, that's potentially a positive development where that is possible. People able to work and to function and to live without having to undertake so much traveling. That's beneficial on potentially on work-life balances, on climate mitigation strategies. Those are positive things. Also, the ability for people to relocate can potentially re-energize local areas which were losing out in some of these effects. These are kind of positive types of things. On the other hand, I think the major negative shock will be related to capital shocks in the financial markets. And here actually, we're just about to publish a paper along with Paolo Veneri, who's one of the lead authors on this very document that we're talking about, using very, very detailed data of capital prices for transactions across US cities in the period before the global financial crisis and post the global financial crisis. And what we're able to show is that the largest effect of the global financial crisis was to shift the balance of capital pricing and liquidity in favor of cities, particularly core cities, large prosperous cities, and away from smaller centers and smaller towns. And so in effect, what happens is geography, economic geography and land markets become an extension of the global bond market. And it provides a non-technological reason for why the global financial crisis was associated with so much interregional divergence, that the capital markets, because of fear, because of uncertainty, pour money into the core cities. And what that does is it reduces the price of capital in the big cities, it increases liquidity, and also makes the collateral requirements much better for local investors. And it does the opposite for smaller places and more peripheral regions. My fear is the same thing will happen this time round. The team that Paolo and I are part of, we've already run the first estimations for both Europe and the UK, and we basically see the same types of patterns. So this is looking at the global financial crisis. My concern, and I've talked about this already in 2 or 3 OECD meetings, as you know, over the last few months, is that the same thing will happen again. Because of the uncertainty, the shock effects of the capital markets, investors are looking for safe havens to invest. And that tends to promote divergence interregionally. And my guess is that this will happen again, which then underlines how important it is to think in this holistic approach, exactly as Enrico's just been referring to, Evelyn as well, exactly to think about how do we build policy systems that really go across all these dimensions to try to help localities to move forward. This is, you know, we have to take things up to a different level from what we've had before. And I think the institutional work, the governance work of the OECD CFE team is going to be absolutely critical here to help places find ways which are realistic to move forward.
Thank you, Phil. Evelyn, the OECD report shows that climate change, aging, digitalization, and other megatrends can affect regions to quite a different extent. So following up on the question to Phil, do you think these megatrends will exacerbate the discontent we see in declining areas, and how to build this holistic approach, the one that Phil was mentioning?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, and I think, of course, this whole situation we are in now, with the COVID-19 crisis, is something that strongly affects our well-being and our quality of life. And I also think it does so differently in urban compared to rural areas. So together with URSA and with, we did a study at the European level, but also at the Netherlands level, where we asked people about their well-being before and during the first lockdown. And we did so, we asked them their specific location to see if there's a difference between urban and rural areas. And we did not find a significant difference before the lockdown, but we did during the lockdown. And in particular, people in urban areas felt much more unhappy because they had to suddenly live in their smaller houses. There was much less opportunity to go outside. They did much less sports activities because they used to go to the sports school, which were all closed. While people in rural areas, they tended to sport more because they had to work from home if they could. Others, it was easier to not work from home also, but also they could go for a walk, they could go for a run because there was much more space. So, so I think also the COVID-19 might have changed a bit the people that are feeling lagging behind in terms of well-being. So it might well be, we already know that in cities, on average, people are less happy, but that has to do with the composition. So the type of people, there are more unemployed people in cities, more low income, more poverty in most cities. Now I'm talking also on Europe and the more developed part of Europe. And I think that will have increased also, these inequalities within cities, but also that at the moment cities are not better places to live in, while rural areas and the more remote areas with more space and more green might have become healthier, if you have enough access to health services, of course, healthier and better places to live in. So it might also be that people that feel lagging behind might also be the people that feel that they are somehow trapped into a city. They have no choice of moving out if they would have liked to. Yeah, they still have to go out for work and cannot work from home. Well, of course, we saw that in rural areas, there are sometimes less opportunities for teleworking, but there might also be more jobs that you can still execute now also outside, or because you have more space, you also have more jobs that you do outside, which can still go on. So, and I also agree with the others that there will, I think, more inequality and disparities that already exist will be enforced. So in economic terms, so from that sense, there will also be, let's say, the more traditional patterns of discontent, but there might also have come new patterns of discontent because of the COVID-19.
Thank you, Evelyn. And Alessandro, after all these interesting thoughts and words of Enrico Giovannini, Philip McCann, Evelyn Van Leeuw, and Theodora Brandmüller, as the chair of an OECD body which works towards better evidence for cities and regions, where does the highest potential for further progress lie in the near future? This is an important question.
A challenging question, but let me start by recognizing that a lot has been already done by the WPTI, and I think we're moving in a good direction, so that should be said. Nevertheless, yes, more should be done and can be done, and there are areas with enormous potential that should start to be addressed. I'll mention a couple of them because, of course, there are many, but certainly a couple that have a lot of potential, and then I will conclude with some general highlight about our attitude, because there is also potential to improve our attitude toward data and statistics. So couple of points, a couple of areas in which I see a lot of potential. Certainly the use of local administrative data and the integration of administrative data coming from the local level. And many of those statistics are geo-reference or geospatial statistics, and many of them are open data. And I think there is still a lot of potential in making a better use of these statistics. I saw Eurostat doing some of this work with the geolocation of health facilities. We have done the same in Canada. We create an open database of health facility. There's a wealth of this information that can be used by policymaker to understand accessibility, proximity to service, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of relevant analysis there. A second area, I think, is the use of sensor data. Again, this is a large family of new data sources, and which include satellite imagery, but also street view imagery. We just completed an R&D project on the use of street view imagery for the estimation of building heights. Again, it's one example, one small area, but the interesting aspect of this technology, many of these technologies, is that they are really globally available, certainly available for most of the OECD countries. They are available on open, sometimes open platform, and they are very standardized. So a lot of potential and possibility to create collaboration there. Now, let me conclude with just a consideration about the progress that I see would be needed in terms of our approach to data. One consideration that I think comes out of many of the examples that I made is that we need to review our attitude and maybe modernize our attitude toward data quality. You know, if you want to have timely statistics, timely indicator, experiment with new data, sometimes you have to compromise to some extent on the quality of the data. One of the messages that we heard from all the users of our flash estimate and now casting statistics is that data that are of good quality, reasonable quality, today are much better than perfect data 3 months down the road. For policymaking, that is really, really important. That's a message that has been repeated you know, constantly in these months. So some data today of a reasonable quality is better than perfect data in 3 months. And maybe for an international publication, this is really challenging because you know, you have to deal with many different countries, but there are potential for improvement even at the OECD level. And actually the report is showing that some timely data is possible, because in the report you have, for instance, excess mortality statistics that were for the period February to June 2020. Pretty amazing for an international publication that was released in the fall of 2020. And the very final point is about where we really need to make progress, which I think is really in experimentation and innovation and investment in statistics. I really like the analogy that Professor Giovannini made about you know, jumping back versus jumping forward. I think this is really something that's sticks in your mind, and I think that we should try to apply the same principle also when it comes to statistics. We should not just jump back to our collection method and methodology that were there pre-COVID, because we had a major challenge in maintaining this, but we really should jump forward and look at new possibility and invest and take some risk, because investment experimentation come with some risk. So I think national statistical offices should do their part. I hope the working party and territorial indicator will also do its part by taking some risk and starting some innovative and experimental project in new local statistics. Some project may fail or may not generate the expected results, but I'm sure there will be innovation and new idea that will come out of this experimentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Teodora, providing timely and relevant evidence at subnational level is already a difficult task. That was underlined by Alessandro. But providing evidence across countries, as Eurostat and OECD do, is even more challenging. So what is Eurostat doing to provide more granular and timely statistics, ensuring also cross-country comparability?
Well, Eurostat has a leading role in coordinating the national statistical institutes of the European Union. And as a response to the crisis, Eurostat published a series of guidelines in different domains, how to address the difficulties encountered or how to address the challenges. Just to give you an example, for example, for the labor force survey, which is the biggest social survey of the EU, in collaboration with the National Statistical Institutes and in collaboration with the International Labour Organization, they introduced a new question into the questionnaire, which is supposed to measure job losses or temporary absence from work due to COVID. So it will be measured in a harmonized way, and the first results have been already published. Another possibility is to use new data sources. I already mentioned the example on geospatial with the healthcare facilities. I would like to mention one more example. We all know that tourism was one of the sector hardest hit by the crisis, and it's especially very concentrated in certain regions. There are regions which are very dependent on tourism. We published also the foreign, especially in foreign tourism. So it also makes a difference whether a region is welcoming foreign tourists, which was very limited this year, or domestic tourists. And in that sense, one of the initiatives, for example, now that we are looking into, that Eurostat signed the collaboration agreements with 4 major booking platforms. So who will provide data for Eurostat on booking activities at a very detailed geographical scale that we can use to measure the recovery, hopefully, of this sector. So this is just another example on how using new data sources can help us in producing more timely, more granular and comparable data, because it uses the same source throughout the countries. So in short, what I would like to maybe finish with that this crisis also gave us the opportunity to advocate the use of new sources and also to promote the value of official statistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Teodora. Of course, this new source will be also fundamental to monitor the recovery and resilience plans of the different countries. So thank you very much, and thank you for all the valuable contributions from our participants, Professor Enrico Giovannini, Professor Philip McCann, Professor Evelyn Van Leeuwen, Alessandro Lasia, and Teodora Brandmüller. Thank you very much. I see some questions from the participants, and I would like to ask to Paolo Veneri, head of the Territorial Analysis and Statistical Unit at CFE, to select or answer to 2 important issues that have been raised. If Paolo is here.
Thank you, Flavia, very much for making the question to me. Since I will just pick one probably very quickly about remote working. The question asked why there are this we observe these spatial differences across space in remote working potential. I think that's the main reasons. Our estimates depend on the type of occupations that are available in each place, in each regions. Therefore, why cities do have higher potential for remote working, mainly because the occupations that are most amenable to remote working, those in the tertiary sectors and in advanced tertiary section that can be easily shifted to remote, are more concentrated in cities. And this is the main reason why we observe that. Of course, this also tend to reflect the level of human capital, the educational attainment levels that we see across space that tend to be higher in cities. This, of course, is an element or a factor of advantage for how different places can react to the containment measures that have been imposed in the last months due to the crisis. Thanks for that. The other questions will be answered separately by chat and by email. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paolo, and thank you for this report. The discussion was very rich, and now I leave the floor to Mr. Rudiger Harand, Head of Economic Analysis, Statistics and Multi-Level Governance section for the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Flavia, and also for doing a really very nice moderation of this event. I mean, that's been really very impressive, I think. I'll be brief because we're already a bit out of time. I basically wanted to do two things. I wanted to tell you a bit, reinforcing a bit about the novelties of this edition of the Regions and Cities at a Glance, and then afterwards, kind of like looking a bit forward, taking on what you've been saying during the discussion and what kind of the areas that we'll be trying to develop over the next 2 years, and also with the view of the next edition of the publication. So, I mean, I think there has been a relatively large consensus that there's really a lot more in this edition of Regions, Cities at a Glance, both with respect to timeless of the data, but also with respect to the breadth, the granularity of the publication. I really would like to thank Paolo and Eric and the whole team who've been making a tremendous effort and really working very hard to do that. And I think it really has been paid off, and it's well reflected in this new publication. What I wanted to do is draw your attention specifically to the Atlas, because we have this new data tool. I mean, Lamia has already mentioned it, but it really is a great resource of data. If you're interested in either the regional or the metropolitan area data, you can go there, you can find what you're interested in, and you can also kind of like put it into a map or put it into a chart and kind of like export it so you can use it for your presentation or anything. So this really is a great tool. I mean, use it. I think it really can give a lot of value to everybody who's interested in that type of data, basically. So that's the first point. The second point, I wanted to reinforce that we're having the country pages much enlarged. They used to be relatively short. We are now having country pages which are 9 pages long. So for each country, having a lot of information for the country. And I'll just give you some examples. We're having a fantastic map on remote working for the different regions in each country. We're having a really nice map on elderly dependency rates as well. And we're also having a map where you can look at basically which are the metropolitan areas in your countries who've been doing well economically over the last period, basically. So this is really, I mean, very, very nice. And there's also interesting information about, for example, internet access beyond what was already shown. We're also looking where the data is available, to what degree fiber access is available within countries. And actually what you see is showing that the gap that you're seeing between rural and urban areas is even larger, it's even stronger when you're looking at really high quality internet access than the data that we had been showing earlier. Then we're also looking at the transition to renewable energy. We're basically showing what is the share within regions of renewable energies that are being produced and what is the share of coal in regions. And that's really interesting. It's also sometimes a bit depressing. I mean, me being German, when I look at that map of Germany and a lot of coal still being used, I mean, I feel really ashamed. But in a way, it kind of like shows where progress needs to be made. And it also shows where kind of like, I mean, support is needed, because, I mean, those regions who we need to be phasing out, I mean, these coal production that will obviously have quite negative implications on their economy. Then we're also looking in there at the different trends in the manufacturing sector in the different regions of the country. So you can really also see, you know, there's a lot of talk about reshoring at the moment. So you can see, you know, what's been happening basically before the COVID crisis on that sector. And finally, we're also mapping the well-being in the different regions. So that's just kind of like a little bit of a, you know, I mean, trying to raise your appetite to actually go and see the country page of your country or the countries that you're interested in. Then the other point I wanted to make, I wanted to basically answer to the different requests of what data you think would be useful going forward. And I mean, a lot of people, I mean, for example, Enrique Trudeau and Alessandro brought up the issue of timeliness of data, and we've been, as you see and as you rightly said, we've been working on that issue, but that certainly is an issue that's still relevant, and especially in the context of COVID. So we'll be working on that, and we'll be trying to come up more regularly, also between the apparitions of region cities declines with more timely data, specifically in the areas of labor markets and tourism sector. And obviously, we'll be moving towards unconventional sources of data to be able to do that. So that really is one of the major areas where we're trying to push in the near future. Then Evelyn mentioned the transition to a net zero carbon economy. And there also we'll be working on trying to understand better what the regional impact will be beyond kind of like, coal is relatively easy to see where that hits. But I mean, there's going to be a wider impact because different industrial sectors will be very differently hit by that. So that's also an area where we'll be looking at very carefully. And there's also some material that will be coming out in the regional outlook that we'll be launching in the spring next year. And finally, there is also, it was brought up, rural linkages and the importance of mid-sized cities and towns. And that's also an area where we're going to try to develop further data going forward and to be able to have more to say on that at the next edition of Cities and Regions at a Glance. That's what I wanted to say. You really thank you everybody for participating in the launch event, which I think was really great. Thank you, Lamia, for making such a nice presentation, and thank you to all the panelists. And I hope that you'll all be helping to spread the news to kind of like disseminate the findings and also the data from the report, and that it can be helpful for really a large number of people and policymakers, and ultimately help to ensure that better regional policies are being made. Thank you very much.
Thank you.